had intended to do this particular lesson in a couple of weeks, and I guess a couple Sunday nights, and well, because this was going to be Fifth Sunday, and so I bumped it up since we met tonight instead of not meeting tonight. I've been doing some work, some study, some writing on the subject of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it just seemed appropriate that that it fell tonight instead of in 2 weeks, because I've spent all last week knocking on people's doors every day. And our group knocked every morning, and then I would go back and rest and study and prepare for the evening, and the rest of the group would spend another couple hours after lunchtime knocking on doors. And as a general rule, we found the people to be very kind, very receptive, the people that we did find at home. There were a couple of instances. It was so funny. My partner all week was not that the name means anything to you, was Jonathan Swain. And Jonathan is the son of one of the kids that was in the youth group when I was at East Wood Street. All right, so I have a connection. Even though I'd never met him, I have a connection to him. And he and I just had a really good time working together. And it was on the third day, I believe it was, that we were knocking. And one of the problems we always had was finding a place to park, because we were out in the country. And look, you know, when you park a strange vehicle somewhere, people are going to notice. So we had a hard time finding a place to park. We finally parked in a public cemetery parking lot that was also shared by a Presbyterian church. And we thought, well, that's about as safe as any place. And so we're knocking on doors, and we no sooner we got out of the vehicle and we're going to go up this road. We've been looking at it on Google Maps, and there's houses everywhere. And there's this guy, he's out mowing, and he's fixing to be finished. He's got a big yard, you know, kind of like the parsonage yard, and he's making his last round right out by the road. I mean, we've parked basically right in front of where he's mowing. And we get out of the truck, and I walk across the street, and that guy drove, I'm talking about as close as from me to Rhonda, drove right by and never picked up his head. Never picked up his head. You know, like he acted like we didn't, like he never saw us. Of course, look, we know he saw us. We know he did. And Jonathan went ahead and started walking up the driveway, and walking up the driveway to the house, because there were some cars there, and he made it about a third of the way up, and a woman stepped out on the porch and hollered, "No, thank you." So that was it. And a lot of the house, and also a lot, and also the day before that, we were knocking in another area out in the country, and we literally saw a woman as we were walking down the road peek out the blinds before we got to her house and pull the blinds. Now, we had door hangers, and so the material we had was in little slips that would literally hang on the door. And so I didn't even knock. And I just put a door hanger on the door. We went on up the road about a half a mile, and we were walking back to the truck. And as we walked by, Jonathan said, "She pulled the blinds again." And I wasn't even looking. I didn't even look. But we were walking back, and the house is back here, and Jonathan just happens to glance back, and she's already got the door hanger material off the door. And she's already got her blinds opened again, and she saw us walking, and we weren't even trying to come up her driveway, and she pulled the blinds again. Jonathan caught her. Well, I found out on the third day of door knocking that the Jehovah's Witnesses really wear that area out. They knock that area a lot. And so we found out that was probably one of the reasons why over half of all the driveways have no trespassing signs at the entrance. And I don't mean like a house that's way off the road. I'm talking about houses out in the country like ours, but pretty close together, and have no trespassing signs at the entrance of the driveway, nailed to the tree, at the end of the driveway. And we were, private property signs, and we respected that. If there was a sign, we did not trespass. and we're respectful. But I had just never seen so many no trespassing signs in a rural community as I did then. And I found out why by talking to a guy that was sitting on the porch when we went up to invite him to the meeting. And that's what he said. He said Jehovah's Witnesses just wear this place out. And he told me a couple of experiences that he'd had with Jehovah's Witnesses. And so in spite of that, and we suspect that probably most people, and by the way, we knew a lot of people were home that wouldn't come to the door. In other words, I mean, you go and you knock on the door, you'd ring a doorbell, and you could hear people walking, like 3 feet on the other side of the door, and they wouldn't peek out or come to the door. You knew that they knew you were there, and in all likelihood, they probably believed that we were Jehovah's Witnesses. That was just the general consensus, and so. And so with that in mind, we don't get a lot of that in our part of the country, although I guess having lived here over 25 years, probably fewer than 5 times Jehovah's Witnesses have come and knocked on our door. The Jehovah's Witnesses have not knocked any doors since the pandemic started. Some of you may have noticed I put a note on Facebook about that they are mailing letters. Instead of knocking doors, they get together and they just start writing. They have these form letters, and they sign their name to them, and then they just take a list, I guess, maybe out of the phone book or something, and they just address them and they just mass mail them. Because when I made mention that I got a letter, a whole bunch of people said, "Hey, I got that. I got that exact same letter." And one of them was a friend of mine who lived in Blue Ridge, Georgia. But she got the exact same letter that I got in Hamilton, Alabama. Obviously, it wasn't signed by the same person, and the addresses that are the return addresses for all of them in a particular area was all the same return address, which that's a little sketchy when you start thinking about it. So we understood what was going on there. But at some point, the Jehovah's Witnesses will begin to knock doors again, and it seems to create a nervousness, a dread. People don't know how to react when when it's obvious. You look out the door, somebody knocks, and you see out the window, you see 2 people standing there, and they've got material in their hand, and they're Jehovah's Witnesses. And so I want to talk a little bit tonight, and if we need to go further, we will, about some do's, and some don'ts with regard to when Jehovah's Witnesses come knocking. The first thing that I would say is that there's nothing to be afraid of. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses are among the most peaceful people that you'll ever meet. They don't serve in the military. They don't have any political ties or allegiances. They don't say, their children don't say the Pledge of Allegiance in school, and so they're not in any way to be considered dangerous or any type of radical group. And so, with that in mind, they shouldn't be feared. Secondly, we don't need to do this to anybody, but especially Jehovah's Witnesses. We don't want to treat anybody poorly when we have an opportunity to talk with them. I've heard through the years, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard about people. I open the door and there's a Jehovah's Witness, and I slam the door in their face. Well, and I'm like, and in my mind, I'm thinking, you don't realize what you've done, but you've just encouraged them. You've just encouraged them to knock more doors, because they're trained, they're taught that the slamming of the door is proof that they're right, and that just encourages them even more to go knock on more doors. And so certainly we wouldn't want to encourage people to be more zealous about their error, but also because it's just not good form. It's just not the way Christians need to treat folks, any folks, Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or anybody else that might come knocking knocking at our door. Also this, think about this. How many opportunities do we really get to talk to somebody about the Bible? If somebody comes and knocks on your door, because let's just be honest, we're not exactly burning it up in our evangelistic efforts. And so, if I have an opportunity to talk to somebody, then I want to try to take advantage of that of that opportunity. And so, there's a number of things there, but there are also some things I want you to understand that you need to know about the Jehovah's Witnesses. That's going to help you understand why I'm going to tell you some of the things that I do going forward. The Jehovah's Witnesses, for about 50 years, were, for lack of a better term, they were incorrigible date setters. In other words, they predicted the end of the world, or they predicted the coming of Jesus. I don't know if I've got it. Yeah. 1874, 1878, 1881, 1910, 1914, 1918, 1925, 1975, and 1984. They've predicted the coming of Jesus in all of those years. And likely others, I just may have missed it at some point. And when I say they, that's another thing we need to understand about Jehovah's Witnesses. There is an organization known as the Watchtower Society. And the Watchtower Society publishes all Jehovah's Witness literature. And it is essentially the ruling body over the Jehovah's Witness, each of the Kingdom Hall. The Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses is the name generally on the building. And the Watchtower Society is the overarching organization. It's in Brooklyn, New York, and they print all of the literature for Jehovah's Witnesses. And so, one thing we need to remember is that whenever a Jehovah's Witness comes to our door, whether they be local or they've come from out of town, they're not representing their local Kingdom Hall. They're representing the organization in Brooklyn, New York. Ultimately, that's what they represent, because everything that they've ever been taught has come out of Brooklyn, New York, and so there's no autonomy of congregations, and there's really no personal autonomy with regard to the Jehovah's Witnesses. I think it is safe to say that given the general qualifications or standards that are used to determine such, the Jehovah's Witness organization is a cult. It is a cult. It seeks to control the thinking of its members. There are a number. I'm going to just throw this out at you. Anthony Hoekema in 1964 wrote a classic book called The Four Major Cults. The Four Major Cults. It's still in print. It's probably been revised. If you've done any study along these lines, you've probably seen Hoekema's book. It may even be in our church library. I don't know. I've got a copy of it. Matter of fact, I think I may have 2 copies of it. But in that book, Hoekema, the very first thing he did was he said, here are 10 characteristics that constitute a cult. And here are 4 groups that meet all of those criteria. One of them was Jehovah's Witnesses. The other one was the Mormons. Another was the Seventh Day Adventists. And the 4th one was the Christian Scientists. And so those 4 religious groups were identified by Hoekema as cults. The 4 largest cults in the United States, I guess, at that time. And so I think it's accurate to refer to them as a cult. I would never refer to the Jehovah's Witness group as a cult if I were talking to one of them. I've heard people talk about that. They talk about that, somebody knocked on their door and I accused them of being members of a cult. Again, that's not the way to make any headway with these folks, and there are their propensity for date selection, for lack of a better term, comes honestly because many of them became disenfranchised with a man by the name of William Miller back in the 1840s. The William Miller group, or the Millerites, believed that Jesus was going to come back. William Miller predicted that the Lord was going to come back between March the 21st, 1843, and March the 21st, 1844. And many of the Millerites, for some reason, sold all their goods and possessions and expected the Lord to come back. Farmers didn't plant crops that year in anticipation that the Lord was coming back. And obviously when March 21st, 1844 came and went, and the Lord still hadn't shown up, they recalculated and said it's going to be October of 1844. And obviously October 1844 came and went, and William Miller disappeared off the face of the earth for the most part. And his followers, many of them, which I understand numbered in the thousands. This was not like some, what was that cult a few years ago, the Hale-Bopp? Remember the Hale-Bopp comet? And the people all drank the poison because they was going to catch the comet? Yeah.
They tried to recruit more.
Applegate. Isn't that his name? Applegate? Applewhite? Applewhite. Okay. The Applewhite, Heaven's Gate. It was the Heaven's Gate cult. Yeah, the Heaven's Gate cult. And that's a small group. And then you had the Jim Jones cult, in Guyana, where over 900 people died there. But Miller had hundreds or thousands of followers. And being disenfranchised with him, many of them began to follow Ellen G. White, who was the founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And then others began to follow a man by the name of Charles Taze Russell. And Russell started what is known as the Jehovah's Witnesses, and was followed in his presidency there by the most well-known of the Jehovah's Witnesses, a man by the name of Judge Rutherford. And so they were the original members of the Jehovah's Witnesses were people who were at least fond of date setting and following those that pretended, and I say portended, not pretended, they pretended to know the date of the coming of the Lord. And so that's kind of just gives you a little bit of background. All right, let me just give you this as well. If you go online, you go to Google. You'll go online and you'll go to Google. I'm gonna write this down just so that y'all and everybody watching can see this. Go to Google and do a search of Beth Serene. Beth Serene. Now you remember a couple weeks ago we were talking about how a lot of the words in our New Testament and Old Testament, the words meant like Bethlehem meant the house of bread. Bethel meant the house of God. Beth Serene means the house of princes. The house of princes. And it was a house that the Jehovah's Witnesses either built or bought in San Diego in the 1920s for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to live in. They bought those guys a house, and as I said in Tennessee last week, talking about it, I said, as best I can tell, none of those three guys ever moved in or paid any property tax on that place. And the Jehovah's Witnesses held that house until about 1947 when they sold it. The house is still standing, and somebody lives in it. I mean, it's in a neighborhood in San Diego, California. But you can. And the picture, at best, it's really kind of shrouded with trees, but you can see the house, and the history is there. But the Jehovah's Witnesses either bought or built a house for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to live in the 1920s. And amazingly, Judge Rutherford lived there for about 25 years. I guess he was waiting on them. But they never managed to show up. And so these are things that you need to know about the Jehovah's Witness group, so that you can. You've heard me use this terminology. Put a rock in their shoe. You are not going to convert a Jehovah's. In other words, let me put it this way: the odds are overwhelmingly against you converting a Jehovah's Witness if they knock on your door and you engage them in a conversation and a Bible study. The chance that you're going to convert them on your front porch is practically zero. It's practically zero. But what can you do? Well, it's the same thing with any other person that you encounter. Whether it be a person at Walmart, or a person at work, or a person at school, or just a person that engages you in some conversation roundabout, that you're not going to convert that person in that initial meeting. But what can you do? You can give them something to think about. And Greg Calkle, in his book Tactics, refers to that as putting a rock in their shoe. In other words, give them something that they cannot turn. Look, all it takes is a small pebble in your shoe, right? And you know it's there. And to put a rock in a person's shoe means you put something there that is a continual reminder. Just like every time you take a step and a rock is in your shoe, it brings attention to itself. And what we want to try to do with Jehovah's Witnesses and others is give them something to dwell on. Like, just by way of example, the Bulletin article today. I don't know if any of y'all read the Bulletin article. So you think you're smarter than Martin Luther. Martin Luther was one of the first proponents of the doctrine of faith only. And yet Martin Luther realized he could not reconcile the doctrine of faith only with the epistle of James. And so rather than changing his doctrine, he just referred to the epistle of James as an epistle of straw and of no consequence. And so what might you do with somebody that taught faith only? You say, well, if you can, can you reconcile James 2:24 with the doctrine of faith only? Because if you can, you're a better man than Martin Luther, who basically invented the doctrine of faith only. Although Ulrich Zwingli, I think, was the first proponent of it shortly before Luther, but not long before Luther. And so, why do you think you can reconcile James 2:24 with faith only when one of the original proponents of faith only couldn't do it? You see, in other words, you put a rock in their shoe. Do you think you're smarter? Do you think you're smarter than the guy that invented the doctrine that you propose to believe and teach? And that's what we want to do with Jehovah's Witnesses, is we want to try to plant a seed of doubt. By the way, Rhonda may remember this man, Mackie Gallimore from Paris. He was the preacher at Purrier. Mackie Gallimore, I believe. No, Mackie was a converted Mormon. You probably don't remember the other. Well, now his name has escaped me. We had a lectureship at Eastwood Street when I was there called Why I Left. And it was based on a 1949 lectureship in Texas, where they had a lectureship and every single preacher in that lectureship had been a preacher or a member in a denomination. And they gave a presentation on why they left that denomination. If you may recall, a few years ago, Bill Cantrell preached on why I left the Baptist Church in our meeting here a number of years ago. Manny Lago was the man's name. Manny Lago preached in our lectureship on why I left, and he was a former Jehovah's Witness. So it's not impossible. It's rare, but it's not impossible. And so I just mentioned these things. I mentioned these things because these are things we need to know in order to try to put a rock in their shoe. Let me give you one more. This is a book that I've had in my possession for about 20 years now. I didn't buy it new. I got it from Charles Balcom. This book is titled, Millions Now Living Will Never Die. Millions Now Living Will Never Die. It's written by Judge Rutherford, the head of the Watchtower Society and the Jehovah's Witness religious body. Okay? It was written copyrighted in 1920. 102 years ago. 102 years ago, the Jehovah's Witnesses published a book titled Millions Now Living Will Never Die. Now, why would they do that? Because they thought that the Lord was going to come back in a handful of years. You remember, they'd already predicted it in 18, and they predicted it again in 25. So they believed that the coming of Jesus was imminent, so they published a book called Millions Now Living Will Never Die. Now, did you know that right now there are fewer than 500,000 people on the entire planet 100 years old or older? Fewer than 500,000 on the entire planet who are 100 years old or older. And if you move that number to 102, it probably shaves her down even more, significantly. So if there's fewer than 1 million people living today that were alive when this book was published, millions now living will never die, what do I know about this book? It's not true. By the way, most Jehovah's Witnesses have never seen this book. You know why? I mean, isn't it obvious? You know, they published this book, but now they don't let their own members read it. Millions now living will never die. And so this, and I hold on to this very tightly. You know, this book is of great value to me. Although you can find them online. I think on Amazon there's some floating around. All right. So now, with regard to the Jehovah's Witnesses, just going to give you just a few things that they believe. All right, a few things that they believe. Number one, they do not believe that Jesus is deity. They deny the divinity of Jesus. They believe that Jesus is the Archangel Michael deified. In other words, Jesus started as the Archangel Michael, and then he became Jesus. They do not believe in the Holy Spirit. That the Holy Spirit is not a person, is not a part of the Godhead. By the way, they deny the Trinity. In denying the deity of Jesus and denying the person of the Holy Spirit, they are deniers of the Trinity. They do not believe in hell. They believe in what is called annihilationism. That if you die and you're not one of the saved, you just cease to exist. God's just going to obliterate you. You don't have a soul that's going to live forever. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as hell. And again, particularly because man does not have an eternal soul. They reject blood transfusions based on a misunderstanding of the book of Leviticus and Acts 15 that says you're not to eat blood. Which, by the way, the Bible forbids the eating of blood. It forbids it in Genesis 9 in the patriarchal age. It forbids the eating of blood in Leviticus 17 in the Mosaic age. And it forbids the eating of blood in Acts 15:29. All right, and so you're wondering now, how can I eat a piece of meat without eating blood? And that is not blood. All right, what is in your steak is not blood. Animals are bled before they go to the meat cutters. All right, so if you're like me and you like your meat really rare, just understand that you're not violating the Bible statement that forbids the eating of blood. But I've never figured out how taking a blood transfusion is the same thing as eating blood. But nevertheless, that's one of their doctrines. They believe that the kingdom was established on the earth in 1914. Now, that's a key doctrine to understand and remember. They believe the kingdom was established in 1914. And they believe that the Watchtower Society and it alone has the right to interpret the Bible. Now, and this is another thing. This is another thing to remember: is their attitude about the Watchtower Society. In essence, now listen to me carefully. In essence, they believe the Watchtower Society to be God's personal representative on earth, and that the Watchtower Society is infallible. I have tried many times and in vain every time to get a Jehovah's Witness to at least consider the possibility that the Watchtower Society could ever be wrong. They'll never, ever admit that the Watchtower Society could be wrong. So if the Watchtower Society can't be wrong, then it's got to be divine, right? It's got to be divine in every facet of what it does. And so those are some things that we need to remember. Lastly, this. Sometimes we are told that we should respect Jehovah's Witnesses for their zeal and evangelistic fervor. And I disagree with that. The Bible says it's good to be zealous in a good thing. And the Jehovah's Witness group is not a good thing. I don't admire the Heaven's Gate cult. They were zealous. They were committed. I don't admire the Jim Jones cult. They were zealous and they were committed. I do not admire suicide bombers of the Muslim faith, and they're zealous and they're committed. So why would I admire zeal and commitment on the part of Jehovah's Witnesses? Zealous and commitment can be desirable, can be admirable, but not when it is in a bad thing. Now, I want to note this, and I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit after this because it's going to take me at least another week to get into this. I've already said, when the Jehovah's Witnesses knock, you have the opportunity, you need to answer, all right? And don't slam the door in their face. Number two, and I practice this, even though I don't think the Scripture is intent on this one thing, I do not invite them into my house. 2 John verse 10 says, if any comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive them into your house or bid them Godspeed. But really the word receive means to take them in. Okay? But just as a general rule, I make them stay on the porch, when I want to talk to them. And if I ever meet with them, in the past, I meet with them in my office. Okay? And so, like I said, I don't think 2 John verse 10 forbids us to invite them into our homes and try to study with them. But I think that I would only do that after they had shown themselves worthy of such an invitation. Right? I mean, a lot of people can come to our door, and just because they've knocked on our door doesn't mean that we're obligated to invite them inside. But somebody might come to your door and show themselves worthy of an invitation after some amount of time, and you might do that then. And then rule number 3 is this. Generally speaking, and almost all the time, Jehovah's Witnesses do not care what you have to say. They do not care what you have to say. But that doesn't mean that they aren't listening to you. All right? They are listening to you. And they are trained to listen for questions. And by the way, Jehovah's Witnesses are good salesmen. Just like any good salesman, a good salesman approaches his prospect and begins to ask questions of that prospect, and ask questions that invite a yes answer, right? In other words, if you can ask a question and you can get that person to say yes, and you can ask another question and get that person to say yes, if you can get them in that yes mindset, then eventually you can do what? You can sell them what you've got to sell, whether it be life insurance or a car or a vacuum cleaner or Amway or whatever it is that you might have. And Jehovah's Witnesses are going to ask you questions. Wouldn't it be great to live in a world where there's no violence and no crime? Well, yeah. But see, they've asked you that question, and what have you done? You've immediately put your mind in yes mode. And they're going, did you know the Bible? The Bible tells us about that. Would you like to see what the Bible says about that? They're getting you in yes mode. Okay? And so, That's a tactic that's used not just by salesmen. It's used in, and I think look, it works. If it works, you use it. I mean, I think we should use it when we have opportunity. So they are not concerned with what you have to say, but they are listening to you. Now, what they're listening for is questions. I don't care. Listen to me. I don't care what a Jehovah's Witness is saying. I don't care if you stop them mid-sentence or you refuse to answer their question. If you say to them, "May I ask you a question?" they're going to stop whatever they're doing. They're going to stop whatever they're doing. They're going to stop whatever they're saying, and they're going to listen to your question. Why? Because they believe that if you are asking a question, that you are interested in what they have to say or what they have to give to you. And so, whatever the Jehovah's Witness says when they come to the door, your first response is, "Can I ask you a question?" And I promise you, you will have their undivided attention. Right? Now, Lord willing, when we come back in our follow-up session, I'm going to give you some of those questions. A lot of it's going to deal with their repeated predictions of the end of the world, the building of Beth Serene, the publication of millions now living will never die, the belief that the kingdom was established in 1914. And I'll just go ahead and give you this one, all right? I'll give you this one before we leave. I've done this because, like I said, I always talk to them. If I get a chance, I talk to them. They come to the door and they're knocking, and I say, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" Immediately, "Yes. Yes, you can." I said, "Do you believe that the kingdom was established in 1914? That the kingdom on earth was established in 1914? Now, if they're honest, they're going to say yes. So when they say yes, I say, "Can I ask you another question?" And of course, they're going to say yes. I say, what do you think Jesus meant when he said in Matthew 17 that there are some standing here who will not taste of death until they see the kingdom come with power? Now, you've told me that you believe the kingdom came in 1914, and Jesus said that there were people alive when he was alive that would live to see the coming of the kingdom. Do you believe that people lived over 1,900 years to see the kingdom established? Now look, you're going to get silence, all right? But what have you done? You planted a seed, hopefully a seed of doubt. You've put a rock in their shoe. All right? That's just one of any number of questions that we're going to talk about, Lord willing, in our next session. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of those who believe this. Does anybody have any questions about this? Anything that you'd like to ask or add? All right, Lord willing, in our next session, we'll deal more specifically with the questions themselves, and then we'll move on. We will move on from there. All right, let me turn this off.